Just leave a condolence card and go. I don't consider you family.
On the day of my father-in-law's funeral, my mother-in-law hurled flowers I brought at me. She continued.
Besides, if it's known that a woman as plain and embarrassing as you is our daughter-in-law, it would be a disgrace to the entire extended family.
Exhausted by her attitude and harassment, I followed her instructions and left only the card. 3 days after the funeral, I was struck by mysterious nausea and illness, so I returned to my parents' home to recuperate. While resting in the living room, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my flustered mother-in-law stood there, apologizing.
I'm sorry. I had no idea things had turned out like this.
My name is Scarlett Jones. Having never had a boyfriend, I met Noah at a hobby class I started upon a friend's invitation when I was 30. We connected over shared interests and, after a year of dating, got married. Noah is my age, incredibly handsome, kind, highly educated from a prestigious university, and comes from a wealthy and respectable family. I didn't know about his background until we had been dating for a while, so it wasn't a conscious choice based on his qualifications. In fact, I felt quite inadequate compared to him, thinking there were plenty of other women who would be a better match. When I learned about Noah's impressive credentials, I worried if we were mismatched or if I was truly good enough. However, Noah accepted me wholeheartedly.
I love you, Scarlett. It has to be Scarlett.
Encouraged by his words, I accepted his proposal and we got married. He is the elite son of a publicly traded company's president, and he has been on a successful trajectory. He too had never dated anyone before. It's intriguing that he didn't have any dating experience with women until the age of 30. However, during our blissful time together, I didn't dwell on that mystery. Despite being the son of a powerful executive, he never rested on his laurels. Through hard work and dedication, he recently earned recognition from his father as the company's successor. Both my husband and father-in-law are currently busy with preparations for the company's transition. They rarely spend time at home, and when they do, it's mostly for sleep. Yet, my husband never neglects me. He reaches out when he can, and on those precious days off, he prioritizes spending time with me. Honestly, he's been a wonderful husband. I've vowed to always support him. Being his wife has brought me immense happiness, except for one thing. After getting married, I ended up living with Noah's family. Since I still had student loans from my college days, I had planned to work. However, Noah pleaded with me, saying,
Scarlett, I'll work hard enough for both of us. I want you to stay home and support me.
I ended up quitting my job and moving to my in-laws' house. Honestly, leaving my job was a bit of a shock because I loved working. The reason I quit my job seems to be because my mother-in-law interfered with Noah. She convinced him that a wife working implies the husband lacks inadequacy. As a result, I spend most of my days at my in-laws' home. While my husband and father-in-law are busy and rarely come home, my stay-at-home mother-in-law, Karen, is always around. Unfortunately, she's quite a character. She seems to dislike me and constantly harasses me with snide remarks. Perhaps it's because she thinks I'm not of the right social standing. Noah's family is wealthy, and they have a long lineage of successful individuals in fields like politics, business, medicine, and chemistry. Almost all of them attended prestigious universities, including Noah's mother, who graduated from a renowned private college. She takes great pride in this heritage. On the other hand, my own family is quite ordinary. My parents were regular office workers, and we didn't come from extreme poverty but certainly weren't affluent. I attended a mid-tier women's college, and my tuition was covered by student loans. My mother-in-law seemed to find fault not only with my family background and university choices, but also with my appearance. Despite being in her 50s, she maintained a youthful look, dressed in flashy designer brands. In her younger days, she worked as a Reader's model and won university beauty pageants. Before getting married, she held a career in sales at a leading advertising agency. In contrast, I had no interest in brands, preferring anime and video games. If I had any extra money, it went toward game merchandise or collector's editions. My appearance wasn't conventionally beautiful. I kept makeup and fashion to a minimum, and while I watched my weight, I was quite plain looking. Naturally, the glitzy world of Reader's models, beauty pageants, and major ad agencies was foreign to me. My social media was filled with game and anime content. It seemed my mother-in-law was genuinely displeased that her son had married an unassuming woman like me, who didn't have an impressive educational background or come from a prestigious family. Because of this, my mother-in-law subjected me to every imaginable form of harassment. She deliberately spilled sauce on freshly laundered clothes, intentionally messed up rooms I had just cleaned, and turned them into trash heaps. Entertainment was forbidden. The hobby class where I first met Noah was shut down, and my friend's contact information was forcibly erased. My beloved anime merchandise and games were sold off for a pittance, with the proceeds going straight into my mother-in-law's pocket. Going out anywhere, even for a simple shopping trip, invited her snide remarks, making it nearly impossible to leave the house. My mother-in-law sold my clothes and cosmetics, saying,
"A wife doesn't need to be fashionable."
And of course, the money went into her pocket. Makeup was forbidden, and I was only allowed to wear tracksuits at home and the suit I used for job hunting when going out. My hard-earned savings from my single days were confiscated. Even the meals I prepared were discarded. Worse yet, they were thrown on the floor, captured in humiliating photos, and gleefully shared online. The only food I was allowed to eat was leftovers. My mother-in-law would mockingly say,
"This meal is perfect for a pitiful pauper,"
while laughing with her friends. Birds of a feather flocked together, and her friends were equally glamorous, wealthy, and disdainful individuals. My mother-in-law would proudly declare,
"Look at my pitiful daughter-in-law. How has she lived looking like this?"
Her friends would chime in,
"If I were her, I'd be too embarrassed to live."
I had no choice but to endure this humiliation. After enduring such a life for about a year, my father-in-law passed away. He had been battling terminal cancer, defying the prognosis and living longer than expected. I found myself responsible for preparing his funeral. Noah, caught up in the company's transition, couldn't focus on funeral arrangements.
"I have no idea about any of this. Scarlett, can you handle it?"
She dumped everything on me, while she lounged around doing nothing. Exhausted and sleep-deprived, I somehow managed to complete the preparations and reach the day of the funeral. However, as I tried to participate in the funeral, my mother-in-law stepped in front of me and made an outrageous demand.
"Scarlett, just leave a condolence card and go."
I couldn't hide my surprise. She continued,
"I don't consider you family. Besides, if it's known that a woman as plain and embarrassing as you is Noah's wife, it would be a disgrace to the entire extended family."
From my perspective, her hysterical outburst was far more embarrassing than anything she accused me of. But arguing back would only escalate things, so I simply replied, "Understood," and left the funeral venue, placing only the card. 3 days after the funeral, I was struck by mysterious nausea and illness, prompting me to return to my parents' home for recovery. Staying at my in-laws' house would have been impossible due to my mother-in-law's constant harassment. My parents were both at work, and as I rested alone in the living room, the doorbell rang. Checking the camera feed, I saw my mother-in-law repeatedly ringing the doorbell. Initially, I ignored it, but her persistent ringing and disruptive behavior outside the front door forced me to reluctantly open it. Perhaps she had come to retrieve me, her stress outlet and housekeeper. Contrary to my expectations, my mother-in-law immediately apologized. Frustrated, I couldn't help but ask, "What's with this sudden change?" In a desperate tone, she offered her apologies, saying,
I had no idea things had turned out like this.
"Let me summarize the situation. As it turns out, my late father-in-law was aware of the harassment I endured from my mother-in-law. Although she had always put on a facade in front of him and Noah, my father-in-law sensed something amiss in our relationship. When he confronted her, she readily confessed. Despite his efforts to persuade her to stop the mistreatment, my mother-in-law remained obstinate. She even went so far as to badmouth me to my father-in-law. Struggling with terminal cancer and limited time left, my father-in-law decided to leave a will. In it, he bequeathed his entire estate to me. Now, my desperate mother-in-law pleads,
Scarlett, please. I'll apologize for everything. Share some of the inheritance with me.
She's in a frenzy, exclaiming,
Isn't this absurd? I came into this marriage after losing everything. You've taken everything from me and left me with nothing.
Behind the seemingly glamorous facade of my mother-in-law lay a tragic backstory. As it turns out, my in-law's marriage was a political alliance. My mother-in-law had originally been in love with someone else. However, her family faced a financial crisis, and in exchange for their support, she was forced to marry my father-in-law. Separated from her true love, she endured a marriage to a man she didn't love. Meanwhile, my father-in-law also had a past love, but societal pressures due to their differing social statuses forced them apart. Despite this, my father-in-law continued to secretly meet with his former lover after marrying my mother-in-law. On the other hand, my mother-in-law suffered severe mistreatment from her mother-in-law and my husband's grandmother, far worse than what I experienced. She endured confinement, exploitation, and even had to give up her beloved career. The political marriage left her estranged from her own family, while her husband remained indifferent, prioritizing his mistress. Divorce was not an option, and she was forbidden from seeing her former love. In such a life, Noah, her only son, was her sole reason for living. When Noah's grandmother passed away, my mother-in-law finally regained some freedom, but her love for her son had become completely twisted. She had even harassed women who approached Noah, going to great lengths to keep them away. Despite Noah's good looks, high income, respectable family background, and decent personality, he hadn't dated anyone until the age of 30, all due to his mother's mistreatment. Naturally, I wasn't an exception. Even though she had been denied a love marriage, I ended up marrying Noah, and my mother-in-law couldn't possibly accept that. So, she resorted to every means possible to separate Noah and me, even if it meant subjecting us to divorce. Upon hearing my mother-in-law's circumstances, I felt sorry for her. However, I understand your situation, but... I leaned in closer, whispering in her ear. You've repeatedly called me poor and ugly, and you've ridiculed me with your friends, haven't you? She stammered.
Well, that's...
And I haven't forgotten how you threw away my cooking and messed up the room right after I cleaned it.
But I'm sorry.
Sorry doesn't cut it. My words left her stunned. While my mother-in-law's circumstances are indeed unfortunate, that doesn't excuse the years of mistreatment I endured. I won't be handing over any inheritance to you. Instead, I'll use it meaningfully for repaying student loans and covering the future educational expenses of our soon-to-be-born child. Regardless of her situation, I won't forgive the way my mother-in-law treated me.
I never thought you'd be like this. I misjudged you, Mom.
Noah discovered his mother's mistreatment toward me through the will. Not only toward me, but he also learned about her harassment of any woman who got close to him during his student days. In his anger, he declared our estrangement.
Scarlett, I'm sorry I didn't notice all this before.
Noah hugged me, tears streaming down his face, apologizing. Despite his busy schedule that kept him away from home, I felt no blame toward him. Instead, I regretted making Noah cry and putting him in a position to apologize. After Noah unilaterally severed ties with my mother-in-law, she continued to protest, but Noah's decision remained firm. My husband and I decided to leave the in-laws' house soon. Until we completed the move, I stayed at my parents' home. Interestingly, since the in-laws' property was in Noah's name, it was promptly put up for sale. As a result, my mother-in-law had to leave the house and is now forced to live alone in a cheap apartment. Since she is still in her 50s, she has no choice but to work, and she is living by doing part-time jobs she is not accustomed to. Additionally, the harassment became known throughout the neighborhood. She was already disliked for flaunting her wealth and looking down on others, and this incident has completely isolated her from the community. Those who once praised my mother-in-law and laughed at me for being poor have now turned against her, mocking her as soon as she fell into poverty. By the way, I heard that my mother-in-law went to see her former fiancé after 30 years, but he had long forgotten about her, was married, and had a family. She caused a scene at his doorstep, and the police were called. Her once prized beauty, which she was so proud of, has drastically changed due to stress. Recently, I saw her in town wearing tattered clothes, her face looking much older, and her body having transformed to an estimated 220 pounds. On the other hand, Noah successfully took over the company and became its president. The business is thriving, and we, as a couple, moved to a high-rise tower apartment near my parents' home. We've further grown the inheritance left by my father-in-law through smart investments, and our life is smooth sailing. From now on, I've pledged to dedicate myself to supporting my husband, Noah, and the new life growing inside me.
How did you find this story? If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you in the next video.